In the far reaches of the galaxy, where light from dying stars shimmered on the edges of space, the Zalareth Empire stood untouched. Their throne world Azuriel floated above a storm-wrapped gas giant, glowing like a jewel in the dark. Among polished crystal towers and rivers of liquid starlight, Empress Virith ruled without question. Her people, tall and graceful with skin that shimmered like moonlight, were born with minds that spoke louder than voices telepaths, proud and precise. They considered themselves the artists of civilization, the chosen minds of the universe. Other species were kept like living artifacts, some for beauty, others for their use. Humanity, the latest to be conquered, had not earned admiration. Instead, they had been scattered across barren worlds, assigned to mining, refining, repairing the forgotten gears in the great Zalareth machine. But Empress Virith had heard whispers of one human who did not obey. A former engineer from Earth's last colony, Commander Elias Rourke, had built something more dangerous than weapons: a movement. Rumors called him clever, unbending, a shadow in the cracks of the Empire. His capture had taken months. But when he was finally found calmly fixing a broken generator in the Outer Rim, he did not fight. He simply raised his hands and said, "Took you long enough." He stood in her throne hall, surrounded by walls that shimmered like frozen waterfalls. The room was silent, watched only by a handful of Zalareth nobles and the Empress herself, seated on a floating throne of crystal that pulsed with her thoughts. No human had ever stood here, not willingly. Most who did were brought as pets or prisoners. Elias stood straight, not kneeling, not even bowing, as if he belonged there. His face showed no fear, only a quiet, unreadable calm. Virith looked at him, mused and curious, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. Her voice, when it came, rang like music shaped by command. "I offered you the chance to speak for your kind. Do so now. Plead for your people, and I may grant you a fragment of mercy." Elias tilted his head, as if considering. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket. The guards tensed, but he moved with such casual grace that no one stopped him. From his coat, he pulled a small wooden stick, simple, harmless. With a flick of his thumb, he struck it against the stone of his boot. A flame sparked to life. The throne room blinked with confusion. Some Zalareth stepped back, sensing heat for the first time from such a primitive source. It was nothing by their standards. A match. An ancient thing. Forgotten. Useless. But Elias stared into the flame for a moment, then looked up and smiled. At the Empress, but at the empty air above her. "Fire," he said softly. "It's small at first." The silence deepened. Virith leaned forward, her voice colder now. "Do you think this trick will impress me, Worm?" She raised her hand, signaling the guards, but Elias didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, not threatening, just steady. The flame flickered, its reflection dancing in the walls of crystal. And then, something strange happened. The floating throne, usually glowing with the Empress's will, flickered just. For a second, soft pulse ran through the chamber's walls, barely noticeable, like a breath drawn in and forgotten. The nobles exchanged quiet glances, unsure if they had imagined it. The Empress's eyes narrowed. Elias smiled again, and this time it wasn't gentle. "You built your empire on the backs of engineers and miners. You made us invisible, so we started watching. You made us silent, so we started listening. You told us what not to touch, and so we learned where the cracks were." The match burned lower in his fingers, the flame steady. "You brought me here to bow," he continued, his voice calm and slow. "But I didn't come to kneel." At that moment, a soft hum ran through the floor, barely audible, like a change in air pressure. One of the nobles shifted uncomfortably. Another looked to the control pillars that lined the chamber's edge. A small light on the central console blinked red once, then returned to blue. Virith rose from her throne, her robe of woven starlight trailing behind her. "What have you done?" she asked, more curious than angry. Elias dropped the burned-out match onto the floor, landed silently. "I lit a signal," he said. "Not for you. For everyone else," before the Empress could respond. The throne flickered again, this time longer. The audience chamber remained still, but attention now coiled through the air like a wire pulled too tight. The guards looked uncertain. The nobles seemed to shift subtly toward the exits. Nothing had exploded. No alarms rang. Yet something was undeniably wrong. Elias looked around the throne room as if memorizing it. "Nice place," he said almost conversationally. "Would be a shame if it lost power." Then he looked directly at the Empress, and for the first time her calm cracked. It was only a flicker in her eyes, a trace of doubt, but it was there far beyond the palace walls. Across the countless systems the Zalareth controlled, something had begun to move, quiet, patient, and human, and the throne pulsed again, weaker this time. The small flame from Elias Rourke's match was more than a simple gesture. It was a message, a signal that rippled through the vast Zalareth Empire with quiet precision. While the Empress and her court stood frozen in the throne room, unaware of the storm about to unfold miles away, on distant planets and space stations, old machines once thought harmless began to stir. In abandoned mining colonies scattered across asteroid belts and barren moons, drills that had been idle for years hummed to life, shifting their programmed paths just enough to disrupt carefully maintained operations. Satellites that formed, the Empire's eyes and ears blinked out in sequence, their silence swallowing entire communication channels, leaving fleets stranded and commanders blind. Cargo vessels, loaded with precious materials meant to fuel the Imperial capital's splendor, ceased their scheduled movements not with explosions or fire, but with quiet, deliberate precision that made each failure seem like a technical fault. Rather than sabotage, no alarms screamed, no weapons fired. Instead, the Empire's great machine began to falter silently, like a giant caught off balance by unseen forces. The Zalareth had long believed their technology infallible, crafted by the best minds in the galaxy. But they never suspected the subtlety of human ingenuity hidden beneath their very noses. For years, while toiling as miners, engineers, and technicians, humans had embedded a secret layer of control within every circuit, every chip, every link of the supply chain. A hidden network woven into the fabric of their servitude, waiting for the moment to awaken. The match in the Empress's throne room was the spark that triggered the chain reaction. The quiet start of a rebellion that could not be crushed by swords or telepathy. As the power grids on Azoriel flickered unpredictably and vital machinery hesitated mid-operation, panic began to spread among the Zalareth elite. The Empress herself felt the tremors beneath her feet, an ancient stability cracking in ways she could not yet understand. Her psychic probes sent out across the Empire found only shadows and silence where there should have been answers. Intelligence. Reports came in confused, describing systems going offline without cause, and key supply routes mysteriously blocked. The Zalareth command struggled to make sense of a rebellion that did not roar, but whispered. A war fought with patience and precision. Instead of blades and blasts, meanwhile on the fringes of the Empire, human communities long hidden in the shadows began to move. Ilias's signal had been received not only in the capital, but also in distant colonies and secret bases, where those who had survived the harsh conditions of subjugation prepared to take back control. They were not soldiers wielding guns, but technicians wielding code, scientists controlling machines, and ordinary people turning tools of oppression into instruments of liberation. The human resistance operated like a well-oiled machine, synchronized across vast distances by a signal no one but they understood. A signal that began with the flicker of a match in a silent throne room. The Empress's advisors scrambled. To restore order, many underestimated the humans' quiet strength, believing their technology too primitive to threaten an empire built on telepathic rule and advanced science. But each malfunction, each disruption, was a carefully planted seed of change, blossoming into a new reality. The Empire's infrastructure, once invincible, now wavered under the weight of human resolve. Ships sat idle in docks, unable to launch. Communications were garbled or lost entirely, leaving isolated pockets of Imperial forces cut off from command. Factories that produced essential components ground to a halt, their assembly lines frozen. For every broken system the Zalareth fixed, another failed elsewhere, like a puzzle with missing pieces deliberately removed. Behind the scenes, Elias worked tirelessly, coordinating these efforts from within the capital, even as he remained, a prisoner under the Empress's watchful eye. His calm exterior hid the storm he had set in motion, a revolution not of violence, but of ingenuity and unyielding spirit. Knew the match was only the beginning. A real fire would spread through patience, through cleverness, and through the unbreakable will of those who had been dismissed as weak and insignificant. The Empress, sensing her empire's foundation shifting beneath her, grew restless and angry. Yet no amount of rage or psychic force could immediately reverse the damage. Her throne, once a symbol of absolute power, now seemed fragile, flickering. In the strange energy that surrounded the palace, for the first time, doubt touched her mind, a feeling foreign and unwelcome. She could not grasp the true scope of the threat, how a single human could ignite so many sparks, how an entire species could rise without traditional weapons or open rebellion. And so the Empire began to reel, caught in a battle it did not. No, it was fighting with an opponent who wielded light and shadow in equal measure. The match lit in a quiet chamber was no longer just a match. It was the first flame of freedom, flickering in the dark, promising a future where the worm no longer bowed, but stood tall. Empress Virith stood in her command chamber, eyes sharp, and filled with disbelief as the reports poured in. Despite the vast power of the Zalarith Empire and their advanced telepathic abilities, a single human, or so she was told, was orchestrating disruptions across her domains. The idea seemed absurd. How could a species she considered primitive and broken, barely more than workers to her people, create such chaos in the heart of her empire? Yet, the evidence was undeniable. Communication networks failed, supply chains stalled, and systems that had once run flawlessly now faltered inexplicably. Refusing to accept defeat, Varith summoned her most elite psychic agents. Those trained since birth to read minds, hunt secrets, and crush dissent before it could grow. They spread across the empire, seeking the rebel cells that supposedly led this insurrection, but their efforts were met with confusion and frustration. The agents found empty facilities, factories left barren and silent, rigs abandoned and stripped clean. Some sites triggered ancient safety traps, harmless but designed to waste time and resources. Data trails were misleading, routing the agents into dead ends and false signals, confusing even their keen senses. No battle cries, no clear enemy fronts. The humans refused to fight in ways the Zalarith understood. Instead of weapons, they used their minds and machines, exploiting flaws in technology with careful code, turning the Empire's own tools against it. Where the Zalarith sought warriors, the humans had scientists and hackers. Where the Zalarith prized brute force and psychic dominance, humanity relied on patience, precision, and ingenuity. These tactics frustrated the Empress more than any open rebellion ever could, because they undermined the very foundation of her power control. While the Empire's forces scrambled to respond, Elias Rourke remained a captive within the palace walls. But his influence stretched far beyond his cell. In quieter moments when guards' eyes were elsewhere, Elias spoke with Virith's youngest attendant, a curious and gentle girl named Lyra, whose loyalty had never before wavered. He told her stories of Earth, of vast blue oceans and green forests, of people who laughed and sang despite hardship, of inventions made not to destroy, but to connect and heal. His words painted pictures of a world very different from the sterile perfection of Azuriel. A place where imperfection was strength and hope was a light that refused to be extinguished. Lyra listened with wide eyes, her mind opening to ideas she had never considered. Doubt crept quietly into her heart, unsettling and unfamiliar. If these humans were more than slaves, if they were thinkers, dreamers, survivors, what did that mean for the Empire she had always served without question? Outside the palace, the Empire's systems continued to falter, and with every failure, the Zalarith felt the walls of certainty crumble. The once flawless machinery that powered their worlds now struggled against unseen forces, and whispers of rebellion grew louder among those who had only recently tasted freedom from human rule. The Empress's confidence was shaken, and her attempts to regain control became more desperate and erratic. Yet, the humans' approach remained subtle, avoiding open conflict while steadily tightening their grip on key systems. The longer the standoff continued, the more the balance of power shifted.
Ow.
Virith's agents returned with frustration and exhaustion, unable to catch a phantom that moved too quickly and thought too deeply. Their failure to find rebels made the Empress question her own assumptions. The unshakable belief that her empire was invincible. Ilias's presence in the palace was a constant reminder of that doubt, a living proof that the humans were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. As the days passed, alliances began to shift. Some nobles whispered behind closed doors, questioning whether the old ways still held sway. Lyra, inspired by Elias's tales, began to seek answers on her own, quietly exploring forbidden texts and ancient histories that suggested strength might lie in cooperation rather than control. The human rebellion was no longer just a threat, was a catalyst, changing the very soul of the empire from within. The empire reeled, not with the crash of weapons or the roar of armies, but with the slow unraveling of certainty and the quiet birth of a new hope. And through it all, Elias remained calm, the flicker of his first match still burning brightly in the minds of those who would not bow. The great throne world of Azuriel, once a shining beacon of power and perfection, began to show cracks beneath its gleaming surface. The energy matrix that fed the floating palace, said to be flawless and eternal, faltered for the first time in centuries. Lights flickered uncertainly in the vast halls, where crystal pillars hummed with a weakening pulse. Atmosphere regulators struggled to keep the air pure and steady, causing brief waves of cool drafts that unsettled the nobles gathered within. Transport gates, those shimmering portals that connected worlds in an instant, suddenly locked down. Without warning, stranding diplomats and visitors in uncomfortable limbo, panic whispered through the imperial court like a rising tide. Dignitaries who once bowed without question now hastened their departures, leaving hurried messages and worried glances. Empress Virith, who had ruled with iron certainty, found her. Control slipping like sand through fingers, her usual calm cracked into desperation, her silver eyes narrowing with frustration and disbelief as she realized the Empire's heart was weakening. It was in this moment of fragile power that she sought out Elias Rourke, the human engineer whose quiet rebellion had brought her empire to its knees, not through force, but through patient precision. She found him in a great hall, once splendid, but now dimming, where walls seemed to sigh under the weight of failing energy. Virith's voice was sharp and demanding as she confronted him, standing tall amid the shadows and failing light. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her tone mixing anger with a rare curiosity. "Do you seek to be my prisoner forever? You demand revenge for your people's suffering?" Elias met her gaze steadily, his expression calm but resolute. He shook his head slowly, refusing to accept the roles the Empress expected. "No," he said simply, "I want only the right to rise." Those words echoed through the hall like a promise, not of violence or conquest, but of renewal and hope. And then, as if responding to that truth, the crystal throne beneath the Empress began to falter. The energy that kept it levitating and glowing faded in a slow, graceful surrender. With a quiet shatter, the throne lost its place in the air and crashed to the polished floor below. It's not with an explosion, but as if it were a delicate thing finally given up to rest. The sound was small, but in that moment it became the loudest signal of all. The symbol of her power was broken. Across the stars, in colonies and hidden places once subdued, humans rose quietly but decisively. They did not brandish weapons or declare war with loud proclamations. Instead, they claimed freedom with steady hands and clear minds, repairing what was broken, rebuilding what was lost, and creating a new future born from resilience rather than destruction. The fall of the throne marked the end of an era and the beginning of something no empire had ever expected, a liberation not won by force, but by courage, cleverness, and the unyielding desire to rise. After the fall of the throne and the quiet collapse of the empire's grip, Elias Rourke found himself released without fanfare, slipping away from the cold walls of captivity into a galaxy now trembling with change. Empress Virith, once a symbol of unyielding power, vanished from the public eye as swiftly as her throne had fallen, her dynasty fading into history like a distant echo. The great crystal palace stood empty, a relic of an age that had passed, while beyond, the stars bore witness to a new beginning. The humans did not march with banners or declare victory with gunfire. Instead, they moved quietly, weaving a new web of cooperation among the stars. The old empire's fractured remains gave way to the formation of the Galactic Council, an assembly unlike any before where every species, whether once conqueror or conquered, had an equal voice. This council was not built on domination, but on dialogue, mutual respect, and the shared desire for repair and renewal. Humanity's role was clear. They offered their strength not as conquerors, but as partners, skilled in rebuilding what was broken and nurturing what was fragile. Former enemies, once fierce and unyielding, found themselves reaching out to humans, drawn by their resilience and willingness to heal old wounds rather than deepen them. Elias, now free from chains both physical and mental, found solace far from the corridors of power aboard a small, humble ship drifting among quiet stars. Here, surrounded by simple comforts and the gentle hum of life support systems, he tended a small garden, a collection of plants he had carefully nurtured through the long days of struggle. As night fell across the endless void, Elias took a match from his pocket, lighting it with a steady hand. This time, the flame was not a signal of rebellion or a spark to ignite revolution. It was warmth, a small light in the vast darkness, a reminder of life and hope. The flame flickered softly, casting gentle shadows on the green leaves in his thoughtful face. As he smiled quietly to himself, somewhere, far away on the once mighty throne world, nature began to reclaim its place. Vines crept slowly over the shattered crystal, weaving through cracks and broken edges, green and alive where cold stone had ruled. The galaxy was healing, and with it, the promise of a future shaped not by fear or dominance, but by unity and the enduring spirit of all who dared to rise.